"Ladies and gentlemen," the captain's trembling voice cracked over the intercom. Is there any fighter pilot on board?" Gasps filled the cabin. A mother clutched her child. A man muttered, "We're doomed." Passengers looked around in terror, hearts pounding. But in row 14, a black woman stirred awake, rubbing her eyes. She blinked at the panic, confused. A flight attendant whispered urgently, Anyone, please answer him." All eyes darted across the cabin, but no one moved. Then slowly, the woman stood, her calm voice cutting through the fear. "Yes, I'm a fighter pilot." The cabin was thick with tension, every second dragging like an eternity. After the captain's desperate plea, murmurs spread through the rows. People craned their necks, searching, their eyes wide with disbelief. "He can't be serious, right?" whispered a businessman, gripping his briefcase. "This isn't a movie. This is real life," said another, voice trembling. Flight attendants rushed up and down the aisles, their forced smiles failing to mask the fear etched on their faces. The sound of crying children filled the cabin, blending with the low hum of engines that suddenly felt fragile, unstable. The black woman, still standing in row 14, stretched her back, her expression calm yet serious. She adjusted her jacket, glanced around at the terrified faces, and then quietly started walking toward the front. At first, no one noticed, but then whispers followed her like a shadow. "Wait! Where's she going? Is she answering the captain?" The tension climbed. Some passengers looked skeptical, others almost relieved, clinging to the possibility that she might actually be what she claimed to be. Meanwhile, at the cockpit door, a flight attendant nearly collided with her. "Ma'am, sit down. Please remain in your seat," the attendant pleaded, panic in her tone. The woman met her gaze steadily. "I need to see the captain. He called for a fighter pilot. I am one." The attendant froze. For a second, disbelief flashed in her eyes. A woman? A civilian-dressed passenger? It didn't match the image in her mind of a combat pilot, but something in the woman's tone, in the steel of her eyes, said otherwise. She hesitated, then quickly pressed her earpiece, murmuring into the line, "Captain, someone claims she's a fighter pilot." The cabin's chatter hushed into near silence. Every ear strained to catch the captain's response. After a tense pause, the intercom crackled again. "Bring her here, now!" The passengers gasped. The flight attendant stepped aside, and the black woman walked firmly toward the cockpit. Behind her, whispers erupted. "No way, she's just bluffing. Look at how calm she is. Maybe she's real. God, I hope she's real." As the cockpit door closed behind her, the cabin was left buzzing with a mix of doubt, fear, and fragile hope. Inside the cockpit, chaos reigned. Red warning lights blinked across the control panel. The co-pilot's hands trembled as he adjusted dials, sweat dripping down his forehead. The captain, pale and visibly shaken, turned sharply at the sight of the woman entering. "You said you're a fighter pilot?" he asked, his voice caught between disbelief and desperation. She gave a curt nod. "United States Air Force. Lieutenant Colonel? Retired. But I've logged over 2,000 hours in combat jets." The co-pilot blinked in shock. "She's serious." The captain let out a shaky breath. "We've lost partial navigation and communications, and radar just picked up an unidentified aircraft closing in fast. If it's hostile, we're sitting ducks. I don't know how long I can keep this bird steady." Her expression hardened, the gravity of the situation clicking instantly into place. She slid into the jump seat behind them, her eyes scanning the instruments. Years of training came flooding back like muscle memory. "All right, listen carefully," she said, her tone sharp but composed. "First, stabilize this pitch before you stall. Keep her nose up. Second, patch me into whatever comms are still functioning. If we've got company, I'll know how to talk to them." The captain obeyed without hesitation. The shift in the cockpit was palpable. Her authority commanded respect instantly. Meanwhile, back in the cabin, passengers anxiously watched the closed cockpit door. Every turbulence bump made people grip their seats tighter. A teenager muttered nervously, "She better be the real deal," while an elderly woman whispered prayers under her breath. Inside the cockpit, the static-filled comms crackled. Then a chilling voice cut through. "Unidentified commercial aircraft. You are in restricted airspace. Divert immediately, or we will engage." The captain paled further, but the woman leaned forward, grabbed the headset, and spoke with steady authority. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Reynolds, United States Air Force, retired. Identify yourself immediately." Silence. Then, after a tense beat, the voice returned, hesitant now. "Colonel Reynolds? Is that really you?" She smirked slightly. "Last I checked. And unless you want an international incident, you'd better back off this plane. These are civilians, not combatants." The line went dead for a moment. The cockpit crew stared at her in awe. Then, the radar screen showed the hostile blip turning, pulling away. The co-pilot whispered, They backed off, just like that." The captain's hands trembled, but for the first time since the crisis began, relief flickered in his eyes. "You just saved every soul on this plane." She leaned back, calm as ever. "That's what I was trained to do." Back in the cabin, turbulence ceased, and the atmosphere shifted. Passengers noticed the calm return of the captain's voice over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are out of immediate danger. Please remain calm. And we owe our thanks to someone very special on board." The cabin erupted in murmurs. Heads turned toward row 14, waiting for her to emerge. Moments later, the cockpit door opened, and she stepped back into the aisle. This time, no one doubted her. Passengers broke into applause, cheers echoing through the cabin. The twins, who had earlier been fidgeting with fear, now smiled wide, eyes glowing with admiration. A businessman who had doubted her whispered, "She's the real deal." As she walked back to her seat, people reached out to shake her hand, to thank her, but she remained humble, nodding politely. One passenger asked, "How could you stay so calm?" Her answer was simple. "Because panic never saves lives. Discipline does." The development built towards something greater than survival. It was no longer just about a plane in danger. It was about prejudice and perception. Moments earlier, many had dismissed her. Just another quiet black woman on a flight. Now, she was the hero who saved them all. Passengers exchanged glances, silently confronting their own biases. And as the woman settled back into her seat, the entire cabin carried a new kind of silence. Not of fear, but of respect. The cabin's applause still echoed as the black woman, Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Reynolds, slid back into her seat. Her calm expression masked the adrenaline that still coursed through her veins, but her sharp eyes revealed she was still alert, still listening to every hum and vibration of the engines. Passengers leaned across aisles, whispering. A little girl tugged at her mother's sleeve and pointed. "Mommy, she's a hero." The woman smiled faintly but closed her eyes, trying to recenter herself. Then, just as relief seemed to settle in, a sudden jolt rattled the plane. Luggage bins clattered open and a wave of gasps spread across the cabin. The captain's strained voice returned over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please stay seated. We're experiencing unexpected turbulence." But Aisha's ears told her otherwise. She leaned slightly toward the window. On the horizon, two faint silhouettes appeared, jets. Her jaw clenched. The comms inside the cockpit crackled again. "Commercial aircraft, identify immediately or prepare to be escorted." This time the voice was sterner, less forgiving. Passengers sensed something was wrong. Panic rippled again. "What's happening now?" someone cried. "Didn't she already fix this?" The flight attendants rushed to calm them, but fear was a wildfire. Aisha rose once more. She didn't wait for permission. She strode back to the cockpit, determination radiating from her. The passengers parted for her instinctively, their earlier doubts now replaced with desperate trust. Inside the cockpit, the captain's knuckles were white against the yoke. The co-pilot's eyes darted between dials, radar, and the distant jets closing in. Aisha's voice cut through like a blade. "Move aside." The captain blinked at her, almost offended, but then saw the certainty in her gaze. Slowly, he shifted. She leaned forward, her hands gliding across the controls with practiced precision. "Switch to secure channel now," she ordered. The co-pilot scrambled but complied. The comms hissed before clearing. She spoke into the headset, her voice crisp, authoritative. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Reynolds, United States Air Force, retired. Tail number confirmed, commercial civilian flight en route to New York. State your intentions." The jets held their position, circling closer. A tense pause stretched. Then the reply came, this time uncertain. "Colonel Reynolds, we didn't know you were on board. Orders were to intercept an unresponsive aircraft entering restricted space." She narrowed her eyes. "Well, you know now. This plane is under my watch. Break formation and clear our path immediately. That's a direct order." The cockpit went dead silent. The captain and co-pilot exchanged glances, stunned that she was speaking to armed fighter pilots as though she still commanded them. But the tone in her voice left no room for argument. After a tense heartbeat, the radar showed the jets pulling back, veering to the edges of the flight path. The voice returned, quieter this time, almost respectful. "Copy that, Colonel. Safe flight. We'll shadow from a distance." Aisha exhaled slowly, setting the headset down. The adrenaline was sharp in her veins, but her composure never cracked. The captain stared at her. "Do you have any idea what you just did? You diffused what could have been catastrophic." Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Sir, when you've flown into enemy fire at Mach 1, 2 overeager interceptors aren't exactly the worst of it." Back in the cabin, passengers pressed their faces to the windows, some catching glimpses of the fading silhouettes. Whispers of awe filled the air. A young man leaned over and said to his seatmate, "She just talked down fighter jets." "Who does that?" Another passenger, an older gentleman with tears in his eyes, whispered, "She saved us twice. Twice in less than an hour." The applause began again, louder this time, rolling through the rows like a wave. People stood, clapping, cheering. The cabin was no longer divided by fear. It was united by respect. But Aisha wasn't finished. She turned back to the captain. "You've got structural warnings on this panel. What's your diversion plan?" The captain hesitated, glancing nervously at the controls. "Nearest alternate is 200 miles out. I was considering—" "Not considering," she cut in firmly. "Execute. Set coordinates now. If those warnings turn real, we won't have time to debate. Divert. Land." Her tone brooked no argument. The captain swallowed hard, then nodded. The co-pilot adjusted course. As the plane banked slightly, Aisha stepped back into the cabin. The passengers looked at her expectantly, clinging to her presence like a lifeline. She raised her hand gently. "We are diverting to the nearest safe airport. We're out of danger, but safety comes first. Trust the crew, and stay calm. Panic helps no one." Her words, steady and commanding, washed over them like a balm. The crying children quieted, parents nodded, strangers reassured one another. For the first time since the ordeal began, order returned to the cabin. An hour later, as the wheels screeched against the tarmac of an alternate airport, the cabin erupted in cheers. Passengers hugged one another, relief flooding every face. Phones buzzed as people recorded the moment, already composing captions in awe of the woman who had saved them. When the plane came to a stop, the captain's voice returned to the intercom, stronger now, though still heavy with emotion. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've flown for 20 years. I've handled storms, engine failures, and emergencies of all kinds. But today, I witnessed something extraordinary. We owe our lives to Lieutenant Colonel Aisha Reynolds. The plane shook with applause again. Passengers stood, clapping until their hands stung, some with tears streaming down their faces. Aisha, ever modest, simply shook her head. I did what needed to be done. But for everyone else on board, she was no ordinary passenger. She was proof that strength doesn't need to announce itself, that sometimes the quietest figure can carry the most power. The climax closed not with the roar of engines or the crack of gunfire, but with something far more profound, a collective realization. That woman they had barely noticed as she slept peacefully in row 14? She wasn't just another traveler. She was their guardian that day. And for every soul on that plane, her name, her calm defiance, would never be forgotten. The cabin was heavy with silence, every passenger holding their breath as the aircraft slowly stabilized under her precise control. The captain, now reassured, kept his voice calm but filled with respect. Captain, over intercom, "Ladies and gentlemen, we owe our safety right now to someone sitting among you. A woman who stepped forward when we needed her most. She is a fighter pilot, and she just helped save this plane." Gasps and murmurs rippled through the cabin. Heads turned. The same passengers who had earlier dismissed her as just another traveler now looked at her with newfound awe. Some whispered in disbelief. "A fighter pilot? Her? Unbelievable. She looked so calm. She was just sleeping back there." For the black woman, this wasn't about recognition. Her hands were steady, her training automatic, her mind clear. This was what years in the cockpit had prepared her for. Moments of pure crisis where hesitation could mean disaster. She leaned back in her seat, took a deep breath, and finally allowed herself to relax, even as adrenaline still coursed through her veins. The passengers began clapping softly, a ripple of gratitude that soon filled the cabin with thunderous applause. A young girl peered over her mother's armrest and whispered, "Mom, she's a superhero." Her mother, tears welling in her eyes, nodded. "Yes, baby, she truly is." The flight attendants, who had earlier passed her by without much acknowledgement, now stood frozen, humbled. One of them whispered to another, We didn't even ask her if she was comfortable earlier." "We didn't see her. We didn't really see her." The woman caught their eyes, offering a soft but knowing smile. She didn't need apologies. Their silence spoke louder than words. Meanwhile, the twins who had been targeted earlier by prejudice were staring wide-eyed. Their father leaned toward them, his voice trembling with pride. "Father, remember this moment, kids. Never let anyone tell you what you can't do just because of how you look. You see that woman? She just proved the world wrong." The twins nodded, their faces lit with admiration, as if they had just witnessed the rewriting of possibility itself. As the plane descended toward its destination, the captain invited her into the cockpit one last time to assist with landing procedures. It wasn't out of necessity, he had regained full control, but out of respect. She hesitated for a moment, then agreed. Inside the cockpit, the captain extended his hand. "Ma'am, on behalf of every soul on this plane, thank you. You didn't just save lives. You reminded us all what courage looks like." She shook his hand firmly, her voice steady. "I didn't do it for thanks. I did it because it needed to be done. That's what service means. That's what flying means." The captain nodded, humbled. "If I may, you were born for the sky." And in that moment, the years of being underestimated, ignored, or second-guessed seemed to dissolve. For once, her story wasn't invisible. Back in the cabin, passengers were buzzing with energy. Phones were out, recording fragments of what had happened, though no video could truly capture the tension, fear, and courage of those moments. Some passengers debated among themselves. I wonder why she never told anyone she was a fighter pilot. Maybe because people wouldn't believe her anyway. Well, they sure believe her now. One elderly couple approached her seat before disembarking. The husband, voice shaking, said, "We lived through wars. We've seen courage. But what you did today, it reminded us of something we thought the world had forgotten." His wife added softly, "Thank you for saving our grandchildren." The woman, her heart warmed, simply replied, "You don't have to thank me. Just see people for who they are, not what they look like. That's thanks enough." The descent continued smoothly. The runway lights appeared through the windows, glowing like a promise of safety. As the wheels touched the ground and the plane slowed, applause erupted again, this time louder, freer, unrestrained. Passengers hugged one another. Some cried, others simply sat in stunned silence, processing what they had just witnessed. The twins jumped up in excitement, clapping wildly, while their father's eyes glistened with pride. Across the cabin, every passenger knew they had lived through a story they would carry forever. When the aircraft came to a stop and the seatbelt sign clicked off, the captain's voice came over the intercom one final time. "Captain. Ladies and gentlemen, today you've witnessed something extraordinary. We are all safe because of one passenger's skill, bravery, and quick thinking. Please join me in thanking her once more." The cabin roared with applause, passengers turning in their seats to look at her. Some reached out to shake her hand as she passed. Others whispered, "Thank you," through tears. A child drew a small airplane on a napkin and handed it to her with shaky handwriting. "My hero." She tucked it into her bag, holding back tears. That little drawing meant more than medals or recognition ever could. For her, the falling action wasn't just the safe landing of a plane, it was the unraveling of assumptions, the breaking down of prejudice, and the quiet rewriting of what people believed possible. The black woman who once slept unnoticed in her seat left that plane as a living reminder. Never judge a person by the surface, because beneath quiet exteriors can lie untold stories, hidden strength, and unmatched courage. As she stepped out into the terminal, the passengers' voices still echoed behind her, carrying whispers of respect that she had fought a lifetime to earn. When the final passengers streamed off the plane, many couldn't resist one last glance at the woman who had transformed their journey. What began as an ordinary flight, with the routine clatter of luggage bins and the faint aroma of recycled air, had become a lesson etched into every soul on board. At the gate, the captain stood waiting. He gestured for her to walk ahead of him, a symbolic act that didn't go unnoticed. The crew, too, exchanged glances of silent respect. For them, hierarchy was everything, but in that moment it was clear. She had commanded the skies. As she stepped into the bustling terminal, the everyday chaos of travel seemed strangely muted. People hurried past with rolling bags and tired faces, oblivious to the miracle that had just occurred. But for the passengers who had lived through it, the world felt different, brighter, sharper, more alive. One of the twins from earlier tugged at his father's sleeve, pointing at her. "Daddy, when I grow up, I want to fly jets like her." The father crouched down, voice thick with emotion. "Then you'll do it, because you've already seen that it's possible." The boy smiled, eyes lit with unshakable belief. The woman overheard, and though she didn't turn around, her lips curved into a quiet smile. Sometimes the greatest victories are invisible, not medals, not ceremonies, but sparks planted in young hearts that would one day blaze into something unstoppable. Back on the plane, the crew gathered their belongings. The flight attendants exchanged hushed reflections, grappling with the weight of what they had witnessed. One admitted softly, "I didn't even look her in the eye when I asked if she wanted water earlier." Another added, "I thought she was just another tired traveler. I had no idea." Their words hung heavy, revealing a truth larger than the flight itself. How often brilliance goes unseen, overlooked, dismissed, until crisis demands it. For the captain, the day's events left a deeper mark. Alone in the cockpit, he stared at the instrument panel, hands still trembling faintly. He had trained for years, logged thousands of hours, yet in his darkest moment, it wasn't his training that saved them. It was her. He whispered to himself, almost as if confessing, "Never again will I underestimate the strength of a stranger." By evening, fragments of the story began to ripple through social media. Passengers shared shaky clips of the announcement, blurry images of her standing calm while fear gripped everyone else. Comments flooded in, "She's a hero. Representation matters. This is what courage looks like." To think she was almost invisible until the crisis hit. And for the first time in a long while, the narrative wasn't about fear or division or doubt, but about unity, resilience, and recognition. Yet for her, the attention meant little. When she finally reached her home that night, she placed her bag by the door and sat quietly in the dark, letting the silence wash over her. She wasn't thinking about applause or headlines. She was thinking about the faces of the passengers, the fear in their eyes, the relief when they landed, the hope she had ignited in the young twins. That, to her, was enough. As she stared out the window at the night sky, she thought back to her first flight as a cadet, the nervous tremor in her hands, the overwhelming weight of responsibility, the voice of her instructor echoing in her ears. "The sky is unforgiving, but so are you." Those words, once a challenge, had become her truth. The story of that flight would live on, not just as a tale of averted disaster, but as a parable of perception. It reminded everyone who heard it that behind every quiet stranger may lie a reservoir of strength, knowledge, and courage invisible to the naked eye. The black woman who once slept unnoticed on a plane had revealed not only her identity as a fighter pilot, but a lesson for the world. Never underestimate the unseen, never dismiss the silent, and never assume strength based on appearance. And perhaps most importantly, it reminded everyone on board that day, and everyone who would one day hear the story, that real heroes often sit quietly among us waiting until the moment they're needed most. The next morning, she woke to messages from colleagues, commanders, even strangers. Praise, gratitude, and awe filled her inbox, but she smiled faintly and set her phone aside. The world might now see her differently, but she hadn't changed. She was the same woman who boarded that plane quietly, unnoticed, and fell asleep like anyone else. What had changed was the world around her, and as she sipped her coffee, she whispered to herself, "Maybe now they'll see."